Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be a titch controversial, which is always fun to film. That's right, today I'm going to be reading and reacting to your bookish controversial opinions, which I always just think is so much fun. I love a hot take. I love a discussion in the comments, the whole thing. Before we dive into all of the juicy details, first a word from this video's sponsor, which is Prismatext. I'm so excited to be partnering up with Prismatext because honestly, I think their app and platform is just truly so cool and completely changes the way you can approach learning a new language. And they basically have the philosophy that by reading a story or a book, you can learn a new language. They basically have decided to throw out the boring, repetitive, and honestly difficult to maintain process of trying to learn a language through flashcards and just pure memorization, but instead they basically embed the language you're trying to learn within one of your favorite stories. And through their app specifically, they have over 250 stories that you can basically read and immerse yourself into not only enjoying the experience, but also learning and picking up that language along the way. The app itself has a variety of different features. Not only can you learn from 16 different languages, but of course uses machine learning to kind of rank and score you along the way. You can also change the difficulty as you go along too, which really helps obviously as you begin to pick up the language itself. Basically utilizing the invisible method of picking up a new language. It also, of course, has repetition, and you just kind of naturally glean the meaning of the words as you go along. It's honestly very, very cool and super unique. And obviously, as a reader myself, the thought that I could multitask reading a story I love and then happen to just pick up a new language along the way, honestly just sounds super cool. It's also super customizable. Maybe you want to learn French by only reading biographies or German via sci-fi stories. It's completely up to you. Each book in general has about 400 different vocabulary words that you're able to learn, which is super cool. If you guys want to learn more about Prismatext, I will of course have a link down below for you guys to download the app, which is currently available on iOS and Android. It's truly such a simple way to learn a new skill by just utilizing something that I already love to do, which is reading. I don't have to create a new habit, break out time in my day already. I can just simply read a book I already wanted to read in the first place, which we love. Again, big shout out to Prismatext for sponsoring this video. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive back into the unpopular opinions. Alrighty, so I asked y'all over on Instagram to submit all of your unpopular opinions, and I thought it'd be fun to react to them together. So let's just go ahead and dive right in, shall we? All right, starting off the bat, we have some very intense fantasy hot takes. The first is Hero of Ages is boring and Brandon Sanderson is overrated. Here's the deal. Obviously, I'm a Brandon Sanderson stan on this channel, but I also respect and understand all bookish opinions. So I personally like Brandon Sanderson quite a bit, but I can also understand why some readers might not love him. For me, I love his plots. I love his characters. I also feel like Brandon Sanderson is a very accessible writer. You pick his books up. I wouldn't say his writing is overly flourished. It's pretty straightforward, but for me, I find it very, very entertaining. That being said though, if you don't really connect with this style or if you find it just maybe a little bit flat, I can understand why you really wouldn't like Brandon Sanderson's stories. Even though again, I'm the biggest stan, but I can kind of take a step back and objectively get why every book's not for everyone. You know what I mean? The other hot take I will agree with is that The Wheel of Time is overrated. Ooh, am I about to get canceled in the comments? But The Wheel of Time is truthfully the biggest conundrum. I do not understand it at all. I have been trying to read The Wheel of Time for years, and I will complete it one day. It's kind of a bucket list fantasy read for me. But I agree with this hot take, which is Wheel of Time is overrated. The world and general story is great, but some of the character voices, ugh. I have to just agree. I think conceptually, it's a cool story. Obviously, it's playing on some of the most beloved fantasy tropes out there. We have good versus evil, this great prophecy that connects a lot of characters through time and fate, and it has a large cast of characters. There's magic, there's combat, all of these things. But at the same time, though, I just cannot get fully invested in the story, and it's one of the things that haunts me as a reader. I like the idea, and I'm by no means disliking any of the books, but a lot of people love The Wheel of Time more than any other series out there, and it's just hard for me to fully get why. I find the plot pacing off. I feel like most of the big action happens off page, which kind of confuses me. The story is a little repetitive, and some of the character point of views I just can't fully connect with, namely the literal chosen one character. I like the books. I just honestly find them to be a bit boring, and I just have a hard time like fully falling into the flow of the story. And it's a confusing one because I want to love it. I went in thinking this is going to be one of my new all-time favorite series, and that is not how it's shaken out for me. I'm currently on book 4. I've been on book 4 for over a year. I think I need to take a step back and a break from the Wheel of Time and maybe just revisit it at a later date. But it's just turning out to be okay for me. Not fantastic. It's not bad, but it's just because it's so loved, I was just a little surprised by my own experience, and clearly I'm not alone, which makes me feel pretty good, to be honest. A lot of comments about smut being overrated, or just I can't wait for the spicy romance and the spicy fantasy romance trend to die. And in some ways, I completely agree, and then in other ways, I also enjoy it. I'm kind of like of two minds of any situation. I think objectively, obviously, there's nothing wrong with this genre. And if you like this genre, there's also nothing wrong with that at all. This is only my personal opinion, just reacting off of a hot take. But I think what happens when any genre gets a little bit of traction or popularity, all of a sudden it feels like that is the only thing being written. And I also feel like some of the trends within spicy fantasy romance are pretty consistent and they persist across series. Granted, I have not read incredibly widely within this genre, so I could be speaking out of two sides of my mouth here. Please correct me if I'm wrong, or if you have recommendations that you think fit kind of what I'm about to say, please let me know, because I love romance and I love fantasy, and I do love when they're combined. I think it can create a really fun and angsty time. What I feel like I'm missing personally from some of the more trending series is tension between the two romantic characters. I feel like often what has been happening is there's like fantasy romance, and then the fantasy is like there and relevant for the beginning, but then it quickly falls to the wayside and the smut becomes very centered stage, which again, if that's your thing, nothing against it. But for me personally as a reader, I'm just not super entertained by that. What I personally like in fantasy romances is the chase, the angst, the will they, won't they. And so I have found with a lot of the recent series I've tried to check out, the pull between the two characters kind of happens way too quickly. And then I'm just kind of bored reading all of the smut. And I think to keep it entertaining, they have to keep escalating the intensity of the smut, and I'm like, what is even happening with this plot? That's what I feel like happened to the Jennifer L. Armentrout series, and I'm sure many others I've tried to check out too. It's just like the balance and the pacing between the characters like isn't great. I definitely get what you mean. I feel like it's everywhere, and even sometimes I feel like when I recommend fantasy books, it's not on this platform, but maybe on TikTok, people are like, but is there spice? I'm like, probably not in the way you're looking for, which is totally fine. But I would agree that I wish there was a bit more variety, even within the genre, because I love romance and fantasy together. It's no secret. But I want there to be like something more drawn out. Like those urban fantasy series that have like 15 books and you're waiting like 10 books for them to kiss? Like personally, that's what I'm looking for. But I understand I might be a small market there, so it might not make sense to write that story. Lots of comments just saying a variety of popular books are overrated. So we're going to do a quick kind of rapid fire round and, see if I agree or disagree. First off, we have The Song of Achilles, overrated. I disagree. This personally was emotionally heavy hitting. I also love any type of like ancient tale retelling. I just think it's really fun, especially how the author is able to humanize this like beautiful story. It landed for me. I also understand though, I feel like when books get just like so much praise, it's hard to kind of overcome those expectations when you pick it up. And it's easy for something to fall flat. Another book is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Yeah, I kind of agree. I think this book is fine. I just don't think it's like the 5 out of 5 star read that a lot of people kind of say it is. There's nothing wrong with it. I would say it's like a solid like 3.5. It's interesting, but it wasn't like the greatest book I've ever read, personally speaking. Sarah J Maas in general pops up a lot. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, because just as popular as she is, I also feel like she's just as popular to not like. So I feel like it's an interesting situation. I feel like you love her or hate her. I obviously built a large part of my YouTube channel back in the day loving her books. I still read a lot of her books recently. They've fallen a lot more flat for me, but I do think she can write an entertaining story and a lot of angst between characters. That being said, though, her last couple releases I just didn't find very entertaining, but what can you do? The Hunger Games is overrated. Hard disagree. The Hunger Games was a cultural reset. No, but actually I feel like TikTok is making me want to reread The Hunger Games because I read it for the first time as a kid, obviously when it was coming out. Blew my mind at the time. And then obviously it created a trend of all of these like dystopian books. It just kind of happens in the book cycle, if you will. But I feel like The Hunger Games would 100% hold up on a reread. I feel like that book did a lot, said a lot, and was very like, it used the dystopian setting so well. And the copycats that came after, not very great. But The Hunger Games, personally, I think holds up. But, you know, to each their own. Someone's hot take is, I think fantasy books should be shorter and focus more on prose. I think this is an interesting point. I think there are authors who do this, and then there's authors who don't. And I think it's just a matter of finding those authors, because I feel like there's so many subgenres within fantasy. You have the massive, big, plot-heavy sort of books, which I love. I love a huge plot with lots of characters, lots of world building. I don't need like really flowery writing in every book I read. Granted though, I love flowery writing, beautiful prose, really small, smart, fantasy leaning stories. And I do feel like there are a lot of those. Some of the top of my head are like Pure Nessie, which is a really great example. Honestly, anything by Silvia Moreno Garcia, The Inheritance of Arcadia Divina, When We Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. Like, I think there's lots of books that are like fantasy / speculative fiction definitely out there that are really good, but I don't think all books need to be like that, because all books I don't think should be the same, especially if they're trying to achieve different things, because I love to read both personally. But I hear you know, I get it. Sometimes fantasy writing can be really boring, especially if you prefer like more prose focused stories. Alrighty, it's time for the next section, which is trope discussion. We have lots of opinions on various very popular tropes. First is love triangles. Am I in a camp that like I actually kind of love a love triangle? And I get it. Love triangles can be bad, but I've always secretly and not so secretly enjoyed a love triangle. And does that make me wrong? I just think the structure and the tension, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I get really bored with romance once the two characters are in love and together. Like, I really don't care, especially if the romance is like the central plot of a story. Obviously, if I love two characters and I'm just seeing them be happy alongside a plot that has like nothing to do with their romance, it's obviously fine. But if the main point of the book is romance, like, I need a curveball, I need tension from somewhere else, and that's usually provided via a love triangle. And I just love it. I love it in books. I love it in K-dramas. I get it. It's unpopular, but personally, it works for me. Next up, some people love friends to lovers, and some people hate it. I'm kind of in the middle. I think if it's done well, if I'm in the mood for it, it could be fine. But I agree, it can be like a little boring. But if it's written, you know, in a way that there's a lot of tension, it could be really, really fun. Personally speaking, if I had to pick, I like enemies to lovers. And I really like second chance romances, especially when they hate each other and then they decide to maybe give it another chance, because there's just so much left unsaid. And I feel like that could be really entertaining. Someone's hot take that they provided, really interesting. Someone said enemies to lovers is a spoiler. Like, to say a book has enemies to lovers. And I definitely see where they're coming from in a way, because knowing that a book is enemies to lovers, that means you know they're going to get together. You know, and I definitely agree that this could be the case for a book where it's not super obvious. I think there are books where it's very clear in reading the synopsis that these two characters hate each other, but you can tell based on the setup of the story, likely it doesn't matter. They're going to get together anyway, because it's just kind of a well-known thing, and based on the setup, it's very obvious. It's like the direction of the story. But I do feel like there's enemies to lovers curveballs in some books. So saying that it's enemies to lovers, especially when it's like, whoa, I really wasn't expecting that book series to have that, could be a bit of a spoiler. So I definitely can see that. I don't think it's true for a lot of books that kind of utilize this genre tag, but I think in specific situations where it happens, where it's very, very unexpected, like complete plot twist, like, why all of a sudden am I thinking they're about to kiss? Like, that didn't happen 2 books ago. I can see how that could be like a little spoilery. You know what I mean? Lots of things about Emily Henry. First off, some people think that Emily Henry books aren't romance. They're more literary fiction. And then also people thinking Emily Henry books are overrated. First, I have read 2 Emily Henry books. I've not read them all, so I'm no Emily Henry expert. I like her books. I'm also not an expert in the romance space, so I feel like you should really take my opinion with literal. You probably shouldn't take it at all, because there are people who read a lot of romance books would probably have a much better informed opinion on this than me. But I think her books are romance. I think, especially like Beach Read, which I've read, like to me that is a classic romance story, you know? Two people who grumpy, there's this will they won't they, but there's a lot of character development and emotional like solo journeying, which I appreciate. But I do feel like the romance and the tension between these two characters is pretty like central to the plot. I think she's a great writer, so her prose and her characters feel very real and fleshed out. So I can see the connection to maybe literary fiction, but it definitely reads more like romance, contemporary fiction to me. But genre tags can be so murky anyways, you know? But I haven't read like Happy Place and some of her other ones, which I think have larger casts of characters, so don't quote me on this. That was a long ramble for something I'm a little murky on. Next is you don't have to keep all the books you read. I totally agree, which is ironic because I own so many books. But if you would believe me, most of the books I read are books I loved, and then I have so many TBR books. Like most of the books I tend to sell or get rid of are books that I've already read. I really only like to keep things on my shelf that I feel like I would reread or just really, really love and like want to recommend, lend to friends, or feature in videos. But if a book didn't really like stick the landing or blow my mind, I tend to actually pass it on. I love holding on to TBR books to the end of time because I love the idea of like, ooh, that could be my next favorite read. Like I love having just like this huge selection of things to pick from to read it next. Some people are very overwhelmed by a large TBR. I personally love it. I feel like the world is my oyster. There's something here that could, you know, blow me away. That's kind of how I feel about it. But yeah, I love getting rid of books that I've read. Next one is Book Talk has trash taste. Here's how I feel about this. As a TikToker myself, I actually really love making TikToks. If you didn't know, I'll leave my TikTok link down below. I feel like with any social media, there's going to be niches everywhere, you know? And I think once you get your algorithm set up, you will find book talkers talking about a huge plethora of different book titles that you will like. It's very, 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 very expansive. Obviously, I think if you just look up book talk, the most popular books will generally pop up, which is kind of the titles that everyone thinks of. On the flip side of that, there are a lot of book talkers recommending a lot of incredible things. So I think it's just about like finding the creators that you know, have similar taste to, following them, and just reading the books that they personally also like. So I think that's kind of a large part of it. Someone said, I actually really love the Chosen One trope. It's always a fun, good time. I agree. I feel like the Chosen One trope sometimes gets a little bit of hate, which I get. Like, it's classic, it's standard. And I think a lot of it just boils down to, like, some tropes you're gonna like and some tropes just don't speak to you. There's something about the Chosen One trope that I just find to be very endearing. And I think because partially I love middle grade and I love classic fantasy setups, like I find the idea of it to be really comforting. And I love a quest. I love a dramatic start. I love an unexpected hero taking on a huge fate and destiny. It doesn't always work. I obviously just complained about the Wheel of Time, which is a classic Chosen One story. But in general, for fantasy, like Chosen One, heists and thieves, like ragtag groups of individuals, magic school, like there's definitely some tropes that I see hinted at and I'm like, tell me more. I'm interested. This might be too specific, but someone did say, I don't think Bryce and Hunt have romantic chemistry and are better off as BFF. I'm going to quickly deal on my Sarah J Maas, Crescent City, you know, complain-a-thon. I agree. I also personally don't think Bryce is a main character for that series. She's like all that interesting. I think she roots it fine, but I think her being with Hunt makes the most unlikable combination of main characters I've read in so long for a series. I dislike both of them separately and together. I find the relationship so boring. I was so hoping that there would be a little bit of a shakeup, if you will, going into book 2, and I was just disappointed by that book on so many levels. But I just do not understand the shipping of Hunt and Bryce. I think they're so boring, and I also find them to be very annoying. And I stand by that assessment. Hardback books are so uncomfortable to hold and read from. Agree, paperbacks are a superior way to read a story, or ebooks. I actually love reading books on my Kindle, but I love having hard books on my bookshelf. Like, the look of a hardcover I prefer, but they're heavy. I have bad wrists. I prefer to read on my Kindle. Assassin's Apprentice is way too slow and boring for me. Here's the thing. I get it. I get it so much. You just gotta have faith and you gotta hold on. And this is the thing that makes me saddest as a Robin Hobb stan, is because I know this. I know this, and I know hopefully a lot of people are interested in trying out Robin Hobb, but I also know they're gonna pick up The Assassin's Apprentice and they're gonna be like, this is boring. And I know it's a little boring, definitely, actually. Like, I kind of agree with you. I think I gave Assassin's Apprentice 3 stars. Like, the first chunk of that book took me a minute. It's very classic. It's set up in its style. The writing style definitely matches that sort of vibe. It's not a book you can just like easily, fall into on page one. It's not going to be like, wow, this is so fast paced immediately, but it's so worth it. You just got to keep trying. Like, the build over the series and into the next trilogy, it's stunning, I promise. But The Assassin's Apprentice, I know, is like not necessarily the most approachable or most entertaining book, but it's so good and it's worthwhile. Like, reflecting back on it, I love The Assassin's Apprentice, but I also know when I read it for the first time, it was kind of boring. Insta Love doesn't always suck. I agree, but I think personally, it sucks in most contexts except in like a very lyrical type of story. Like, I feel like if Insta Love can exist, if it's like this fated meeting and then all of these very strange and wonderful things happen from there, I feel like if it's used almost like myth-based tale, it can be very, very successful and like dreamlike and beautiful. Otherwise, I feel like it's like underdeveloped, but I definitely think it can work in certain situations, at least for me personally. I don't mind it always. And the last one I'll react to is, I hate that books seem to have no special editions or like 10. I need one good one, not 5. Yeah, I feel like we are in like a whole new craze for special editions. I'm of the mindset, if you're going to give me a special edition, I want the whole series to have a special edition. Otherwise, I'm not interested in collecting like a solo book. I personally am a big, I like them all to match edition wise. So sometimes I'm confused by publishers think I need like 6 versions of one book, like the first book in a series. I'd much rather them use the resources to release the whole series in like a cool new bind up, if you know what I mean. But yeah, there are a lot of special editions. In some ways, I think it's really cool, but a lot of them I don't do because I like things to match, and I just usually know like sequels aren't going to get that special edition. But sometimes companies like Lumicrate, I think especially, does like full series special edition releases. Those are very good. But yeah, there's so many now. It's a little overwhelming. It's a little like, capitalism is definitely a thing. Capitalism is definitely at play here. They're wanting you to buy lots of different versions. I personally don't have enough space to be like a huge collector of a lot of different types of books. Luckily, I have like some self-control in that regard. But yeah, I feel like publishers should do full series and not just the first book like over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. It seems repetitive, and they're also never even that different. And the special edition is like a different color and doesn't match. I don't know. It's weird to me. I personally am not really a big special edition girly. Not always. Sometimes I am. Don't get me wrong. But it's specific instances. Like the special editions I love, for example, are like when an indie book that gains a lot of popularity gets re-released in like a stunning hardcover copy. Like, I think that's really awesome. But just like a random different dust jacket, at a bookstore, like personally, I'm not so drawn to that. You know what I mean? Alrighty guys, those are some of your unpopular bookish opinions and my reaction to them. Again, big shout out to Prismatext for sponsoring this video. I will have a link down below to download their app if you are interested. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye.